All right, good to be here. Good morning, everybody. It's Darth back with you again. Wanted to talk about some more Wheel of Time, which, might get stale eventually, but that well ain't dry yet. And speaking of wells, today we're going to be doing a review of The Eye of the World. Now, I want to say this review is a review of The Eye of the World if you've already read the entire series, because what I want to talk about is something that a lot of reviews don't get to talk about when they talk about The Eye of the World, which is the exquisite foreshadowing. There's a term that I heard once whenever somebody was talking about the movie Pirates of the Caribbean. It was a Redditor who said it, and he said that movie had the best conservation of space that he had ever seen, meaning that every bit of dialogue, every scene had something in it that informed on the characters, foreshadowed something else. There was no fat that needed to be trimmed off. And I wouldn't say that The Eye of the World has quite the same level as maybe Pirates of the Caribbean, because that first movie is fantastic. And The Eye of the World is great, don't get me wrong. It's a fantastic book. Just right off the bat, I'll tell you, I love that book. But there are a couple of things that it's got that are quirks that I think maybe wouldn't have been in there if Robert Jordan felt confident that this was going to be a full series. And he has actually said in interviews that he wrapped up the ending the way that he did, in particular, because he wanted it to feel like its own isolated story that had a conclusion if he didn't get to proceed with the rest of the series. I don't think he quite accomplished that, so I think he kind of went halfway between both. It's not perfect, but there is a fantastic amount of setup and foreshadowing for the rest of the series present. And we're just going to be talking about some of that. And before I go on, I just want to give a quick shout out. There's a person out there who subscribed to my YouTube channel, and that means that you're interested in what I have to say. And forgive me, I don't remember what your name is, but I think it's really cool that you're interested in what I'm saying and that you want to hear more. So thank you, and shout out to you. Hopefully the first of several. I don't know, it probably won't get big. I'm gonna do it in the car, but whatever. In any case, Eye of the World. Okay, so right off the bat, Robert Jordan does something. The Eye of the World, I should say, feels different from every other book in the series. The rest of the series is more adult than The Eye of the World, and the rest of the series has a different pace. But The Eye of the World itself is its own, well, like I said, it's a secular, self-contained novel that just happens to be the start of the Wheel of Time. And there are so many subtle things that Robert Jordan put in there that you don't catch until you reread it, sometimes multiple times, because it's hard to catch all of it. There's so much. I tend to tell people that they've not truly read The Wheel of Time until they've read the whole series twice, because you read the whole series and you go, wow, I don't know how he kept up with this many characters and all this world building. And it's clear to me, just thinking back on it, that he had a plan from the start, and I can see that, but I don't know how he did that. And he didn't even introduce some of his ideas until the third or fourth book, and it just blew up on us. When a totally different, people do that kind of thing all the time. But then you go back and you read it, and you go from, wow, what a great storyteller, to, this man's a freaking genius. You're just blown away, because kind of like my Pirates of the Caribbean comparison, or Caribbean, But kind of like that comparison, Robert Jordan is just brilliant at using every paragraph and every page as set up for something. And what I find every time I read through the books, I find that he puts in little sentences, which we take to be world-building sentences. And, you know, we think, oh, okay, yeah, the mountains of mist around Emmons Field, a lot of wolves, a lot of ravens, that's interesting. And then later on you figure out that the reason that some farmer, it might have been Sinbui, mentions that there's more wolves every year, it seems like, and they're all getting closer, and da-da-da-da-da. You just took it for world building. No. It's because of Perrin. It's because Perrin is in the village, and the wolves are trying to figure out who this guy is. And the fact that Perrin's dreams are different with Balsamon whenever he comes across him, there's a reason for that. It's because, you know, Wolf Dream. He has a different connection to it than Rand or Matt would. And oh god, there's so much. I probably should reread each of the books before I do this, but I'm just gonna trust on my experience to kind of be able to get me through it here. So there is so much. Some things pay off immediately, you know, and that's intentional. That's part of good story writing, is that you need to have setup and payoff, and those are interesting too. Like a great example would be the Green Man thing, right? Because it just kind of comes up as part of conversation, and then it informs on the plot, and then they end up going and visiting him. Or you know, there's the little bits with Lan, and you kind of figure out his backstory as you go through it. That's intentionally in there, so that way you can learn more about these characters without it being an exposition dump, right? And that's just good writing. But then there's other shit, like Lan and Nynaeve's relationship, and you don't see it until you see it. And there's even deeper things. Tom and Moraine, frankly, I think that one's underwritten. Pretty much everybody does, I think. But, you know, you see it in the Eye of the World a little bit. I will say, I think you see it a whole lot more at the beginning of The Shadow Rising. Whenever they are in Tyr and Moraine's kind of pushing him out of the way, and you get it from her perspective and from Tom's perspective, their thoughts on each other. Tom calling her a fine woman to Matt, that kind of thing. But that foreshadowing is absolutely there. One that is famous that I think everybody brings up is that if you go back through and reread, now that you know exactly what channeling is and how it works and how people come across it, we get to see channeling from Egwene's perspective as she's learning how to do it, and Moraine explains to her what happens if you go through the process without a teacher to guide you, and how a lot of people die in that process, etc. And you get sick 3 times after you do 3 different things, and by then you're either going to get sick and wither away, or you're going to be good. And then we see, after we reread, we can count the times that Rand channeled and then got sick, and we can see the effects of that sickness and it play out on the plot. He's just a masterful storyteller, and he's doing all of this in a book that also has to introduce you to the world, introduce you to I think one of the first ensemble casts that was ever written in fantasy. I might be wrong about that. I know that Lord of the Rings is, you know, obviously before it, and it's got one. But you know, he's just doing all of this stuff at the same time, and to have the dots connected and know where your characters are going, to know who the character of Nynaeve is well enough that in book 1 you can already have her, from her own perspective, being an unreliable narrator about how stubborn and muley she is. That's incredible. That's amazing writing. And, you know, I do think that there are a couple of times where, in the interest of fleshing out his world, the pacing suffers a little bit in Eye of the World. Particularly, there is this bit that's like 30 pages long that starts with Rand and Matt on the back of a wagon into Camelin, and then it's a flashback to their travels as they were getting there, and then it's back to them being in Camelin again. And it's not a very long segment. Like I said, it might be 20, 30 pages. That shit feels like it's 100 pages long. It just drags in the middle of the book. And I don't know. I never have too much fun with that part. I think that the only thing it does is it shows us the second instance of Rand channeling and him getting sick, and it builds Matt's character a little bit, but that's one of those things I anticipate that they'll change for the show, not just because they need to cut down on the number of locations, which Rafe Judkins already mentioned, but also because it's not super interesting, and when you cut that out, you can show a lot more interesting stuff, like maybe you could throw in more Logain, and that seems the direction that they're going, which I like. I like that. Quick side note here. I saw that Moraine is wearing pants in her teaser, and that's something that Min does almost exclusively at the start of the show. So it's not really an important change, but characters do need things iconic about them that makes them separate and distinct from the rest of the cast. So I don't know. I wish they hadn't done that, but it's just such a small quibble. In any case, speaking of setup, Min Farshaw is our first real introduction to, no, that's not true. We kind of know that the prophecies of the dragon exist because Padden Fane mentions them, and I'm pretty sure he quickly gets shut up for doing so. But Min is technically, because of that, our second introduction to prophecy in the series. And we hear quickly that Egwene and Rand are not meant for each other. And of course there's a lot of setup going on there because, as you know, Min knows more than that. And she's aware that her and Rand are meant for each other. Which is great because Min is love, Min is life. That's just... out of context, somebody misquoting me on that's going to think that's a really homosexual statement. Oh well. So, in any case, Min has these viewings of people, and she's, it's interesting that Robert Jordan put so much prophecy in this. I think that typically fantasy writers, they lean on prophecy, but they don't like prophecy because prophecy ties them into whatever their vision is for the future, and sometimes you just want to tweak some stuff and it doesn't quite align with the prophecy, and if you say the prophecy in the wrong way, then you end up with a situation where it doesn't pan out satisfactorily, or a situation where you accidentally spoil your own, climax, and that's not good for storytelling. So I'm really curious if they kind of hedge that in the show a little bit, especially since they're making some changes. That would be distinctly in their favor to get rid of some of the prophecy. But the reason that fantasy authors like prophecy so much is because it ups stakes, right? It's kind of like, what is that little spoon? It's like an amuse-bouche for the story. And by telling you, hey, I know that you're watching this little thing, but this big thing's coming, the prophecy helps get readers excited, and also creates a lot of dialogue. It's a double-edged sword. I'll leave it there. And Min has several prophecies, so she just kind of blurts out a ton of stuff. Robert Jordan goes back in later, and he thinks to himself, hey, I need more prophecies. So he has Moraine later recalling, she doesn't tell us what the prophecy said, but Moraine recalling information that she got from Min while she was in Baerlon that we never hear, which is how she was informed of other events ahead of time. And I love that. That's fantastic. Because even though that is probably something that he added in later, it makes the world feel more alive, right? We, the readers, don't get to know everything. We, the readers, still only get part from the perspective of who we see. That's one of Robert Jordan's real strengths, is that he manages to juggle what's actually happening in the background, and there's a lot of background stories going on, with what bit we're seeing, and yet he still gives us enough to make it feel real, There's some fantastic horror elements in this book. Shatterlogoth, obviously, is the clear one. My favorite is actually the first dream with Balsamon breaking the spines of the rats, and then Rand goes downstairs in Baerlon, and he finds out that the rats all around the inn have had their backs broken, and it's just, that's not great. And then the Murderel shows up, and that whole section is fantastic. The ways are also awesome. There's just so much cool in this book, and he didn't need to explain it all. It's not science fiction. He didn't need to say, yes, well, the ways were created by a temporal shift and midichlorians. There's none of that. It's just, here's the world. It's a different world from the one you know. Evil things can get so evil that they become real. And later on, I'm going to connect that in a way that maybe you will get and maybe you won't, which is the world of dreams. And in that world, nightmares really do become real. And so if reality, since there are multiple realities as we find out in Book 2, The Great Hunt, when Rand goes through the Portal Stone, if reality is different layers and shades of real, then it's possible for great emotion, great fear, etc. to impact Tel'aran'rhiod, which is the world of dreams, which encompasses all of the realities. So then it's possible for things like Mashadar and Machin Shin to exist, because they are born out of those dreams and or nightmares. Which it's also kind of hinted at that that's how Agenor created certain shadow spawn, which I love. I think that that's awesome. That would particularly make sense for Darkhounds, which are a corrupted form of wolves, which I think we get hinted at them in the Eye of the World, but I don't think we actually see them until the Dragon Reborn. Yeah. I think Lan goes out into the woods and he fights some of them, but we never see them in the Eye of the World. Holy shit, I'm recalling this book pretty well. Also, for anybody out there who's an audiobook reader, I want to give a quick shout out to Kate Redding and Michael Kramer, specifically because they somehow managed to make one of our favorite characters who gets introduced in this first book loyal. They managed to make him even more lovable, because when Michael Kramer talks about his voice, he does loyal like this, and it's just wonderful. It reminds me a little of Andre the Giant, right? Speaking of Andre the Giant, a bunch of celebrities got together and made a The Princess Bride home movie. It's like an hour and 10 minutes long. It's on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, go watch that. It is hilarious. It's wonderful. In any case, back to the Eye of the World here. So, you know the story beats. You know what's going on. The ending is the last thing I'm going to talk about on this one. The ending is really confusing, and I expect that it gets cut from the show. Specifically, I expect that they cut out the part with Ishamael. They may have him show up a couple times earlier in the season in the dreams, because I think they'll still do the dream sequences. That makes sense. But I cannot imagine that they want to end the season of their, $80 million show or whatever it's cost. I can't imagine that they want to end that season with something that nobody understands at all. And it takes until book 4. Again, Robert Jordan's fantastic foreshadowing here. Or maybe just him calling back to it because he knew he needed to provide some explanation for that. But it takes until we see that Rand remembers how he severed Ishamael from the ability to be connected to the Dark One, and then does the exact same thing to Asmodean, removing his protection from the taint, or the corruption, as the new show's going to call it. It takes until book 4 when we see that to understand that that final fight was Rand tunneling into the world of dreams through a gateway, and then fighting Balsamon, who was probably waiting there to hear back from Agenor and Bethamel that they had been successful. However, I will point out that Ishamael seems to know more than the rest of the Forsaken, so it's very likely that he knew that they wouldn't be successful. And that tends to line up with the way that Robert Jordan writes the Dark One reincarnating members of the Forsaken. He tends to reward those with a second life who do things according to his plan, even if his overarching plan is for them to die. And the reason that I say that, and that might even be confusing to some of you who have read the series a couple of times, is because I am the theorist who supposed many years ago, and still absolutely think my theory is correct, that the Dark One could not kill the Dragon Reborn, and he and Ishamael knew this, and they were aware that the only time that they had the real opportunity to do so was at that foretold chosen time when the dragon goes into Sheol Gul. I'm of the belief that before that moment, Rand can't die in the series, and that's why they send out attempts they know are going to fail. They don't send out, Moradin or Ishamael showing up in the Two Rivers on day 1 and glassing the whole thing. That doesn't happen, because the Dark One doesn't really win by killing Rand. That resets the cycle, and he's got another one to go. The Dark One wins by converting Rand. And most of the Wheel of Time's intrigue is actually sometimes efforts by Dark Friends to save Rand from other Dark Friends. Or, Shadow Spawn from Shadow Spawn, as we see in Book 4, Shadow Rising, that kind of thing. But a lot of it is the Dark One manipulating events to make Rand darker and darker and darker as a person. It is so close to being successful. That's kind of the inspiration for my own book series, but I'm not there yet. I'm not nearly a writer like that. In any case, so this whole end sequence, there's a couple of things that happen in it that are kind of weird, like that one. I think that they'll probably keep the pool of Sidene that is used to fight the Trolloc army back at Tarwin's Gap. They'll probably keep that for the show. That's a good, climax moment. I bet that comes in episode 5, and that episode 6 is actually aftermath and setup for season 2. Kind of going the Game of Thrones route, where you give like a decompress episode after the big battle in the penultimate episode, right? But that's what I anticipate. I will say one thing that's kind of sloppy there. No. Sloppy is the wrong word. Jordan was too careful, too articulate, and just too thought out for me to call anything sloppy, and that word feels rude. What I should say is that I think that at the beginning, while he was still working on a couple of little tweaks of his magic system, one thing that he wrote is inconsistent with the rest of the series, and that is that I think Agonor's the one that dies to the Green Man. So that would be Bethamel that charged after Rand. Bethamel's death. He basically pulls too much of the power, and beyond even burning himself out or blowing up everything around him or something like that, he basically melts himself, right? Rand wakes up in a greasy smear of what is left of Bethamel, which is really gross, and never gets talked about. That boy needs a bath. But he does this contending to try and wrest away the power of the Eye from Rand, and Rand has already drawn some of it, and that's a little inconsistent, both in the way that drawing too much of the power affects Bethamel, because we get told it can do various things, but we never really see other things beyond stilling or some, massive suicidal moment. There's people driving on the wrong side of the road over here. I don't know what that is, but okay. And so that's a little weird. And also, we learn later on that men gain strength in jumps, in spurts, and leaps and bounds, right? And so for Rand to be contesting how much he could draw versus how much Bethamel could draw, and Rand actually does draw too much at one point, and that's what he throws at Ishamael, severing those ties. But for him to be resting with one of the Forsaken at the end of the first book should mean that he has to be equivalent in strength to that member of the Forsaken, and the compendium doesn't, or the companion I should say, does not indicate that Bethamel was weak at all. Far from that, in fact. So there's just a minor quibble there on how strong Rand is at the beginning, or how the power works or is set up. It's little things. It's not stuff that I think would truly detract from anybody's experience with it. One other thing I do need to say, which I love, Daniel Green made it a point in his video, but I'm just going to shout it out again because it's great. In this series, Shaitan, the Dark One, is not stupid. And because of that, whenever he sends Trollocs to the Two Rivers and to chase after everybody, he sends as many as he can conceivably get through the ways in one go, while that method of travel is still new to them. He doesn't send one guy and then you get like lucky and you overcome the one. No. Army. Straight up, just army, right off the bat. And that is awesome. Especially considering that he didn't really seem to want to kill Rand at the time. And again, that could be a point of contention. You might argue that yes, he did, and what would they do without Rand? And I can understand that. I'll get into my whole theory post about that sometime if you guys want me to, but right now this video's at 30 minutes. Let me just say, other champions. So, in any case, I am going to hop out of here. Y'all have a great day.